All right. So again, today we're covering the single party compensation agreement, the commission agreement, and the cooperating broker compensation agreement. And you may be like, Amy, why are these forms important? Well, because with everything that's coming down the pipe through the National Association of Realtors and the legal things and all the lawsuits and settlements and stuff that are happening, and the potential of them pulling the cooperating commission out of the MLS and different things like that, it's going to be important that we ensure that we're getting paid when there is compensation being offered to us from the listing agent, right? And in addition to that, we want to make sure that in all transactions that we're protected. So there's different ways to utilize these different forms. We're going to start with the cooperating broker compensation form. This form is not utilized very often because for the most part, it states that we're going to get the commission that's in the MLS, and that's what they're offering us. As long as we're a cooperating broker, it's already in there that that's what we're getting. We don't have to clarify it. But let's say they take it out of there, or if we're working with an agent that's from an MLS that we are not co-opt with. Okay, so by co-opt, what do I mean? I mean, like if Barry's is your primary MLS and you log into the MLS, any of those houses that you have access to in the search in that MLS are cooperating brokers, and you're due the commission being offered. Okay. If let's say I'm in the Barry's MLS and now I'm making a offer in the, we'll say in San Diego, maybe I've decided I want to buy an investment property, an Airbnb down in San Diego. So I'm making an offer down there. I have a client that wants to make an offer and they're like, Amy, I know you're not a professional down in that area, but I want to use you to make my purchase. Number one, I always recommend that people use agents local to the area or knowledgeable in the area. So I would highly not recommend you representing somebody down in Southern California. But for the case of the example, let's say that we're writing an offer. We are not a co-op broker for that MLS system. So I would always want to submit the offer with the cooperating broker compensation agreement and escrow instructions, confirming that that commission that was being offered is also going to be paid to me, because contractually that's being offered to other agents that are part of that MLS system and not me, who's not part of that MLS. So we always want to confirm that. And if we move down in this future road that we're headed down and they pull the commission out of the MLS system where we don't have that option to put it in there anymore, we want to make sure that we have it confirmed what the listing agent has told us on the property that we will be receiving for submitting an offer on that property, assuming that there is a commission being offered. Okay. So that's where we would use our cooperating broker compensation agreement and escrow instructions. You're going to identify seller's brokerage firm, property, and seller is section 1. So here's where you're going to put the seller's brokerage. So whoever that property is listed with, you're going to put that information here. Is a real estate broker who has entered into a written agreement for marketing and sale of or lease of the real property, manufactured home, or business opportunity described as. This is where you're going to put the specific address of that property. You're going to put the parcel number on the next line. You're going to put the city on the next space and then the county at the end. Then the next line, California property for, that's where you're going to put in the seller's name. So all the listing information goes on that top, listing brokerage, address, and seller's names.
Amy,
The next, yes.
really quick. So this is something we would use if we were only if we were submitting an offer in a different MLS, or if the MLS doesn't specify the buyer's agent commission.
Correct. That's how you'd utilize this form.
Okay.
Okay. Identify, section 2 is identity of buyer's brokerage. So here's where you're going to put your information, you know, our brokerage, and then buyer's names go in line 2. Section 3, property listed with the MLS service. You're going to put what MLS that property is listed with. Okay. Provided the transaction between the party closes or seller's brokerage receives compensation for the transaction, seller's broker agrees to pay buyer's broker, and buyer's broker agrees to accept compensation as follows. This is where we're going to clarify. You can utilize this form on any property, just for the record. You can use it as a confirmation of what is already listed in the MLS. Okay, so if you're like, you want to just really protect yourself, sometimes there was an issue back several years ago where there were some concerns that people were changing things after we'd entered into contract or after the offer was submitted. Things were getting changed in the MLS. Now you can go back and kind of see that history. But this would be one way that, hey, I'm submitting an offer. Here's what's in the MLS. We're confirming that. So that's one way to do it. Here, so that's A is confirmation of compensation in the MLS. Buyer's broker is a participant of the MLS or reciprocal MLS and accepts the offer of compensation published in the MLS as blank, right? So you put in whatever is listed in the MLS there. If we are a participant in that MLS or the reciprocal MLS. So again, how that applies to us is like if we're Barry's, we log into Barry's or we log into Metro List. Any of those properties that we can see on our search are considered reciprocal. Okay. If we're going to modify that compensation that's listed in the MLS, buyer's broker is a participant in the MLS, a reciprocal MLS. Again, this is only if it's part of the same MLS we are part of. They accept the offer of compensation published in the MLS as modified herein, blank percent of the selling or leasing price or flat amount. So if you wanted to adjust that commission, this is how you would do it here. So maybe they were only offering 1%. You talked to the listing agent and said, hey, I'm going to submit this, but my buyer, they can only come in with 1%. I've got a BRBC for 1.5%. I need 1.5%. Are you willing to kick in an extra 0.5% to make this deal work? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. So then we're going to fill in 1.5% here instead of the 1% that's being offered to us. That would be a modifying, or you could modify it down. Okay. So either way works. Be careful when you start modifying your commission with the listing broker, because sometimes what happens is we have clients and they're like, hey, I'm your family member, and will you take less commission if you work with me? Can we credit back to the seller to get a better deal? And you're like, yeah, that's a great idea. I'm happy to do that. And then we go in here with this cooperating broker compensation form, the CBC, and say, hey, I know you're offering 3%. We're only going to take 2%. We modify it in here. Well, just because you modified what commission you're taking on the CBC does not mean that extra percent is going to the seller. Okay. The listing agent could be pocketing that money. So just a heads up on that. We want to make sure that if we're ever doing something like that, we want to negotiate that on the residential purchase agreement as a credit back to the seller. So just a heads up on that. Okay, so here we have confirmation of compensation or modification of that compensation. Again, both A and B are if it's our primary MLS or a reciprocal MLS. So one of the properties that we see when we log into our MLS and we're searching for properties. Okay, A and B. Any questions about A and B? All right. C, cooperating broker is not a member of the MLS or reciprocal MLS. So this would be that example that I told you at the very beginning, if you missed it, where I'm in the Barry's MLS system in Northern California. I've got a family member or a client who wants to submit an offer on a property in Southern California. That's not part of our MLS. It's not part of our reciprocal MLS. So this is where we would want to start using item C. Okay, we're not a member of the MLS or the reciprocal MLS. We want to confirm that we're going to get paid for that transaction. Buyer's broker compensation shall be blank percent of the selling or leasing price or blank. That blank there is just for a flat rate. Seller's broker and buyer's broker agree to resolve disputes arising out of this agreement by arbitration conducted by the Association of Realtors, or if none, the MLS to which the seller's brokerage belongs. Okay, so this is where you'd put in that percentage. Maybe you could see, or you had a conversation with that agent and they said, yeah, we're offering a cooperating broker compensation of 3%. Perfect, we're gonna fill in 3% there, right? Whatever they tell you it is, if you're happy with it, you're gonna do that. Okay, keep in mind, we're not using this form to negotiate our commission with the seller. Okay, we have a separate form for that. If we're using the BRBC, we have the SPBB form, I think is what it's called, which is the seller's I'm gonna have to look up the name of it, but it allows us to negotiate our commission with the seller directly. Okay, we're not doing this. This is, we've talked with the listing agent. We know what the agreement is. We're just confirming that compensation. Okay, D here is short sale confirmation of compensation in the MLS. We have not done very many short sales in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years. But in case you are negotiating on a short sale, that would be D. Buyer's broker is a participant of the MLS or a reciprocal MLS, accepts the offer of compensation published in the MLS and agrees to any reduction in commission in the MLS that specifies the method of such reduction is allowable under the MLS rules. Okay, so this is just, it's a short sale confirmation of commission. Okay, we're saying, hey, we're participants. We accept the offer of compensation published in the MLS, and we agree to any reduction in compensation and commission or reduction in commission in the MLS that specifies the method of reduction is allowable under the MLS rules, which is like the short sale lender comes back and says, hey, we're only willing to approve this short sale if the total commission is less than 5%, then that might cause a reduction. So oftentimes what happens with short sales is like, number one, if you're not familiar with short sales, it's where you have a property that's being sold for less than what the sellers owe on that property. So we have to get the lender's approval to sell that property. And oftentimes in the private remarks, what they do is they say, you know, any reduction in commission to be split 50-50. Okay, because sometimes the short sale lenders come back and say, we're not paying 6% commission, we're only paying 5% commission, and they split that reduction 50-50. So oftentimes it'll say that. So that's where D comes into play on the short sale. Okay, so A, B is for a modification or a confirmation of the commission as listed in the MLS, assuming that you're a participant or reciprocal MLS. C is where you would confirm the commission that was being offered by the listing agent for a MLS for which you are not a member or reciprocal member for. And then D is for short sales. Okay, so those are all if it's listed with the MLS. 4 is property is not listed with any MLS. Okay, so that would be like, hey, we're working an off-market deal with another agent that the property is not listed yet. We want to submit this form and use number 4. The buyer's broker compensation will be blank of the selling or price or blank. Okay, super simple. We just check this box. We fill in the percent here that we already talked with the listing agent amount just to confirm that commission amount so that we have it in writing somewhere in the transaction. Okay. Here's where, so that's number 4, not listed with the MLS. Number 5, sale to tenant procured by buyer's tenant's broker. If the property is listed for lease and that's tenant's broker procures a tenant for the property and during the term of the lease or any extension that the tenant acquires the property and becomes the buyer, the tenant's broker compensation shall be, and you're like, oh my gosh, Amy, that's so confusing. That's just saying that, hey, we helped you with finding the tenant for a property that was being leased. And if anytime this tenant becomes a buyer of said property, you're going to pay me a commission for that purchase. Okay. No, that's a little confusing. You're not going to use that one very much, but it's in there in case you ever need it. And then 6 is other, because you know how the car forms really likes to give us our other line. So any questions there on 1 through 6? Really? Oh, go ahead, Claudia.
So in that last one, is there an
Yeah.
expiration on like time frame for is it or so obviously this form is, you know, it's valid at the time that it's used, but so for instance, if on number 5, if the tenant ends up buying the house 2 years later, how would you verify that? Or can you say like at any so during the entire so I see the entire or during the term, but how do you, I don't know. Do you kind of see what I'm trying to ask? Sorry.
Yeah, so you would just need to make sure that you're staying in contact with your clients, right? But it is during the entire term of the lease. So anytime they're leasing or any extension of that lease. So even if it rolled to month, that would be an extension of the lease. So at any time that buyer or that tenant rents that property and then decides to buy it, you would be due the commission on this form.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. 7 is broker's instructions to escrow holder. Seller's broker and buyer's broker instruct escrow holder to disperse the buyer's broker to the buyer's broker the amount specified in paragraphs 3, 4, or 5 out of the seller's broker's proceeds in escrow, and upon close of escrow of the property, this compensation instruction can be amended or revoked only with the written consent of both brokers. Escrow holder shall immediately notify brokers if either broker instructs escrow holder to change the terms of this instruction. So this is a legally binding document instructing the escrow holder what to pay us, and it can only be changed with the consent of both parties. Okay, that would be the buyer's broker and the listing broker. Okay, if paragraphs 3B, 3C, 4, or 6 is checked, okay, so 6 would be the other line. 4 is it's not listed with the MLS service. And then 1 or 3 would be C or D, B or C, B, modification of compensation, or not a member of the MLS. Okay, so under any of those boxes, this agreement is not binding until the broker or the office manager for the seller's brokerage firm has signed below. If paragraph 3B is checked, the commission stated on the MLS is reduced. This agreement is not binding until the broker or office manager for the buyer's broker firm has signed below. Okay, so those are, so if we check, if we're just confirming compensation up here with 3A, we don't need broker or manager approval. Or D, we also don't need broker or manager approval. Okay, 3B or C is checked. We need broker approval. Along with 4, broker's approval, and 6, broker's approval. Anastasia?
Amy, why does it say if 3B is checked and the commission stated and the MLS is reduced, this agreement is not binding? Why is?
Because the buyer's broker has the final say on whether we can take a reduced commission as a buyer's agent. So in that instance, if we're accepting a reduced commission from what's stated in the MLS, then we need the sign off of our broker as the buyer's agent.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, so here's where by signing below, the undersigned acknowledge that each read, understands, and accepts and received a copy of this agreement. Here's where the seller's agent signs, the listing agent. If paragraph 3B, 3C, 4, or 6 is checked, then we also need their broker's signature. And here's where the buyer's agent information is put in and signed by the buyer's agent. And if 3B is checked, the commission is reduced. Then we need our office manager or broker signature down there for the buyer's agent. So this is how that form is used. Questions? All right. Again, this can become a really important form if they pull the commission from the MLS as being stated in there, because we are going to want to submit this with every single offer to confirm if we'll need to have a conversation, obviously, with the listing agent ahead of time, confirm if they are offering compensation or not. And if they are offering compensation, we want to confirm that with this document. Okay. So just be aware that this may come into a play in a much more major role and more frequent role than we see it right now. Okay, and remember, if we're gonna negotiate that commission directly with the seller, if the seller going into the offer isn't offering a commission and we want to negotiate that, we have to have a BRBC signed and in place, and then we check the box on the residential purchase agreement that we're going to negotiate the commission with the seller, and then we use the SPBB form. So that's how you would negotiate that. And oftentimes, it might be in your best interest to negotiate it as a closing cost credit versus negotiating with the seller to cover commission. Because sellers are sometimes tightwads. They'd rather give a credit to the buyer than pay your commission. Okay, just throwing that out there. All right, moving on to the next form. We have the single party compensation agreement, or the SP form. In this one, we're going to put the date prepared in the upper left-hand corner. You're going to put in your buyer's names or your seller's names here. That's going to be the principal. This is usually, identified. I was trying to remember, this usually goes in effect for like a listing. Okay, so just throwing that out there. Okay. You're going to put it usually goes seller's names here. Then you're going to put your brokerage here. You're going to put the city that the property is located in here. So notice it has to have a property, the county of here, and then the full property address on the next line. Again, make sure it's the numbers, the street name, and the suffix of that street, court, drive, road, whatever it might be. That all goes in that top section, just like almost any other form, except on this one, it's kind of rearranged just a little bit. The compensation to broker, the amount or rate of real estate commissions is not fixed by law, nor is it set by our office. Just to clarify, they are set by each broker individually and may be negotiated between the principal and the broker. The way that we operate is we allow you to negotiate your commission fully and completely with whatever party you're working with. The principal agrees to pay broker, irrespective of agency relationships, either blank % of the sales price or total rents for the original term or lease, or blank as follows. Okay, so this would be blank %. So you might be like, you're going to pay me 3% or 4% or 2%, whatever that might be. You're going to fill in that number there, or you could do a flat rate. And it's as follows. So we've got A through F. If principal accepts agreement with blank, here's the other party to sell, lease, purchase, or exchange the property during the period commencing on, here's where you put your start date, usually going to be today's date, and expiring on whenever that's going to expire. Okay, so maybe we're going to say through December of this year. So this might be that, hey, I sent out some golden letters and somebody wants to sell their property to my buyer. This is going to be a single party compensation agreement, or maybe it could be that your principal is well, oftentimes it's still, you may not have a listing agreement in place. Okay, so this would take the place of a listing agreement. So we're not actually listing the property, we're just negotiating the sale. So yeah, golden letter. Somebody's like, yeah, I want to sell my property. You're like, perfect. I'll do it for you. I'll bring my buyer in for 4% commission. I'll negotiate this deal for you. Single party compensation agreement. We're not actually listing your property. I'm not going to do all the completed paperwork. We might also use something like this, or the compensation agreement, or the single party compensation agreement, for a situation where we've got tenants purchasing the property that they're in, right? So somewhere where it's like an off-market transaction and we don't have a listing agreement signed. Anastasia, did that answer your question?
Kinda. So basically this is acting in a dual agency.
Well, you may or may not be representing both parties. So it may be, maybe somebody mailed out golden letters and the seller's like, yeah, I want to sell. And then they're like, but I have my own agent. So then they contact their agent and their agent's like, yeah, I'll negotiate the sale between this buyer for you. Now you're representing the buyer. You've got another agent. This other agent may use it for the listing transaction to get that property sold. So it doesn't have to be dual agency. It can be just representing one or the other. But it's usually property specific.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. The compensation period, provided the other party completes the transaction or is prevented from doing so by the principal, or in the case of a lease enters possession. My phone is ringing off the hook today. I apologize. The other party includes a person or entity related to the other party, or who in any manner acts in other party's behalf, including if other party is a corporation, limited liability company, partnership, or any person or entity in which the other party has legal beneficial interest, or which is legal beneficial interest in other party. Okay, so this includes any person or entity that might be related to the other party, right? So this is the same idea as like the BRBC, where it covers you a little bit for like, oh, I've got a BRBC with Anastasia, but Anastasia's husband's actually doing the purchase, so that BRBC doesn't apply. This is just covering your basis there, that, hey, it covers my basis for anybody related as well. The principal hereby irrevocably assigns to broker the above compensation from the principal's funds and proceeds in escrow, if applicable. In the event of an exchange, broker will disclose if broker is also collecting compensation from additional parties. Principal warrants that principal has no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker regarding the purchase, sale, exchange, or lease of property. This agreement shall be binding even if during the compensation period principal enters into a listing agreement with any other broker to sell or lease the property or a representation agreement to buy or lease the property. Okay, so this is going to be valid even if. Okay. Any questions about that section? Okay. The benefits of using the MLS, the impact of opting out of the MLS, presenting all offers, right? So this is that same paragraph that we see in the residential listing agreement. I'm not going to read through this whole thing. It just talks about the importance of listing a property to get potentially get the highest price, right? And then we all sign that. Dun, 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 dun. It's also, just so you know, too, if you're representing them on the listing side, this party, it gives you the authority to enter the property into the MLS after the close of escrow for comps purposes and so that you get counted for it, like in places where they pull the stats from the MLS. So just so you know, it does give you the ability to establish comparable sales or leasing data with MLS rules.
Would you mark it as an off-market deal at that point in the MLS?
Yeah, it would get marked as an off-market deal.
Okay.
Yep. I was like, I think the option used to be for comp purpose only, but I think now it's just off-market deal. Okay. Agency relationships disclosure. If the property includes residential, commercial, or mobile home and is being sold or leased for a period exceeding 1 year, broker acting as agent for the principal shall give principal an agency disclosure form prior to presenting the offer to purchase or lease. Representation in the transaction. Broker will act as the principal exclusively in any resulting transaction. So we check that box if that is the only principal. Broker will act as dual agent. See, this is where you get to select. Representing both the principal and the other party in the resulting transaction. Principal understands and agrees that a dual agent may not, without the express permission of the respective party, disclose the other party confidential information, including but not limited to facts related to either the buyer or seller's financial position, motivations, bargaining position, or other personal information that may impact price, including the principal or other party's willingness to accept a price less than the listing price or willingness to pay a price greater than the price offered, and except as set forth above, a dual agent is obligated to disclose known facts materially affecting the value or desirability of the property to both parties. Okay, so this is, hey, broker's acting as an agent just for the principal is the first one. Broker is acting as a dual agent for both parties, or 3 is broker is acting as an agent for the other party exclusively. Okay, in any resulting transaction. Principal agrees and understands that all acts of the broker, even those that assist the principal in performing or completing any of the principal's contractual or legal obligations, are intended for the benefit of the other party exclusively. Principal is advised to seek real estate, legal, tax, insurance, and other desired assistance from the appropriate professionals. You're like, Amy, how does that work? Well, maybe you've got a buyer who wants to make an offer on a for sale by owner property, right? Or it could be somebody you sent a golden letter to, or somebody you were door knocking and they're like, yeah, we'll sell your buyer the property. We don't need you to represent you, but we are willing to pay you for bringing that buyer. Single party compensation. We've only got one person involved here. Right? So we're saying, hey, we're willing to pay you X%, but I'm acting for the agent for the other party, not the seller, right? So that might be where that comes into play. Okay. And I might be helping provide them with some disclosures and stuff that they need to complete, but everything that I'm doing is for the intended benefit of the other party. Okay. This agreement does not require the broker to solicit offers on the property from other party, nor does it authorize broker to solicit offers from any other person or entity, right? We're just working on this one specific transaction. Broker shall confirm agency relationship described above or is modified in writing prior to commencement with the seller's execution of the purchase agreement. Potentially competing sellers and buyers. Principal understands that broker may have or obtain listings on other properties and that potential buyers may consider make offers on or purchase through broker property the same or similar to property. Principal consents to broker's representation of sellers and buyers of other properties. Before, during, and after the end of this agreement, principal acknowledges the receipt of the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, disclosure and consent, CAR form, PRBS. Termination of agency relationship, principal acknowledges and agrees that the representation duties of an agency relationship with broker terminate at the expiration of this agreement, or if it occurs first, the completion of the transaction specified in the agreement. So if anytime either the sale is completed or we reach the expiration date, we terminate the relationship. Equal housing opportunity, property is offered in compliance with federal, state, and local anti-discrimination laws. Applicable laws, principal agrees to comply with applicable federal, state, local laws, regulations regarding the sale or lease of property. Attorney fees, in any action, proceeding, or arbitration between principal and broker regarding the obligation to pay compensation under this agreement, principal and broker are each responsible for paying their own attorney fees and costs, except as provided in paragraph 6A. Here's where we go into the mediation that we're agreeing to mediate upon any dispute that arises first. Additional mediation terms, same as the residential purchase agreement, the items excluded from mediation, which is things like judicial foreclosure, unlawful detainers, things like that. 7 has other terms and conditions. It's just blank lines, because as we always mention on every form, CAR likes to give you those blank lines to fill in. Or you could have a brokerage addendum here that you attach. So if we have something in place, or there's a brokerage that has something in place, you could just check that box and attach it. 8 is management approval. If the associate licensee in broker's office, salesperson, or broker associate enters into this agreement on the broker's behalf and the broker or manager does not approve of its terms, broker or manager has the right to cancel this agreement in writing within 5 days after its execution. That verbiage is in the listing agreement and the residential purchase agreement as well, just so you know. Successors and assigns. This agreement shall be binding upon principal and principal's successors and assigns. So if the principal assigned it to somebody else, it would still be valid. The entire contract, all prior discussions, negotiations, and agreements between the parties concerning the subject matter in this agreement are superseded by this agreement. Verbal means nothing, which constitutes the entire contract and a complete and exclusive expression of their agreement and may not be contradicted by evidence of any prior agreement or contemporaneous oral agreement. This agreement and any supplement, addendum, or modification, including any photo or fax, may be executed in counterparts. One party can sign one and another party can sign the other. As long as they match exactly, we're good to go. Legally authorized signer, right? Same idea as every other document. Whenever the signature or initials of the legally authorized signer identified in the signature box below appear in the agreement or any related documents, it shall be deemed in a representative capacity for the entity described and not in an individual capacity unless otherwise indicated. The legally authorized signer represents that the entity for which the person is acting already exists and is in good standing to do business in California, and shall deliver to broker within 3 days after execution of this agreement evidence of authority to act in that capacity, such as but not limited to the applicable portion of the trust or certificate of trust, letters of testamentary, court order, power of attorney, corporate resolution, the formation documents of the business entity. Okay, here these signature blocks look just like the listing agreement or the residential purchase agreement. Here's where the principals are going to sign. Here's where the broker is going to sign. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. So single broker. So I lied earlier. We're going to use the other compensation agreement if there's 2 brokerages involved, but this is for if just whoever's getting compensated is coming from one party. Okay, it's only going to one broker, whether that broker is representing the seller, the buyer, or both. Okay, one broker involved. This does give you the right, though, that you could collect compensation from a seller while you're representing the buyer and the seller has no representation. Okay, so questions. Off-market deal where you're representing the seller, the buyer, or both, and there's no other brokerages involved, we would use the single party compensation agreement. Okay, the other option, and this one, just so you know, has all the attached forms, the fair housing and discrimination, We've got the, I thought there had another one. I thought it had the, oh, it should have the, I thought it had the PRBS on here, but I'm not seeing it. So just so you know, you should include the PRBS because it's not on here and it should be on here. So make sure you include that because it references it in that document. Okay. Then we have the commission agreement. This one's very similar to the last form. Again, the amount or rate of real estate commission not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually and may be negotiable between buyer, seller, landlord, tenant, option, optionee, principal, broker, right? Whoever you're representing and yourself. Keep in mind at Realty One Group, this is my disclaimer that we don't have any set commission, so you can choose exactly how it is that you want to conduct your business. Here's where you're going to put the principal's name. Okay, here's where you agrees to pay the broker. So who is doing the principal? Think of it this way. The principal is the person paying the commission. Okay, for the most part, when we use these forms, it's going to be the seller is paying the commission. Otherwise, we just use our BRBC and we move on. Okay, so keep that in mind. So this is going to be the majority of the time, the seller is paying the commission. That's going to be your principal. So you're going to put the seller's names here, even if you're not representing them. I don't know if this one allows you to do that or not. We'll get to there in a second. I can't remember. But this is the principal. Here's where you put agrees to pay the broker. It's actually got multiple lines there in case there's more than one. As compensation for services, irrespective of agency relationships, the sum of either X% of the transaction price or blank dollars. Okay. For the property situated in the city of blank in the county of blank, California, described as blank. Described as is where you put the full legal address of the property, including the number, the street, and the suffix, street, court, drive, circle, whatever it is. Compensation is payable if broker or if principal accepts an offer on the above described property no later than blank date as follows. Okay, this is how when commission is being paid or compensation is being paid. Here's where you're going to put the date that they need to accept the offer by. So if you were submitting this with a purchase agreement, it would probably be the same time that that purchase agreement expires. We would make this expire, but it's totally up to you. Okay. As follows. On recordation of the deed or other evidence of title of if a lease or execution of the lease or an option on execution of the option agreement. Okay, that'd be number one is when the compensation actually gets paid. If completion of the transaction is prevented by default of the principal, then upon such defaults, if completion, if damages by suit, settlement, or otherwise, and then in an amount equal or lesser to 1/2 of the damages recovered, or the above compensation after first deducting title and escrow expenses and the expenses of collection. If any, broker may cooperate with other brokerages and divide with other brokerages such compensation in any manner acceptable to broker. Principal hereby irrevocably assigns broker the above compensation from the principal's funds and proceeds in escrow. Okay. Here's where it talks about the MLS again. That's the same, just so you know, the same paragraph here is very similar to like what you see in a regular listing agreement. Like here's when that compensation is due. It also talks about it in like the BRBC when the compensation is due. So it's, hey, when it's the sale is completed, if the sale is prevented by the party, or if there's any damages awarded because we took it to court. Okay. Benefits of using the MLS, impacts of offering or opting out of the MLS and presenting those offers. Same block that we saw in the last one, same block that you see in the listing agreement. Attorney's fees. In any action, proceeding, or arbitration between principal and broker arising out of this agreement, the prevailing party shall be entitled to reasonable attorney fees and costs, except as provided in 3A. Dispute resolution goes through mediation. Okay, same as the last one. Additional terms or other terms and conditions, same as the last one. Here's where we identify who the principals are. So see, this one's a lot shorter, more condensed. We don't have to specify who's representing who in this. So this would be like, hey, seller wants to sell the property. We've got another brokerage involved, but it's an off-market property. Seller's saying that, hey, if I accept an offer in the next 2 weeks on this property or the next week on this property, I'm going to pay you a compensation when that deal closes. And I have the right to split that however I want with any other brokerage. Okay, so this might be like the buyer has another brokerage involved and we're going to split that commission or whatever that might look like. So this gives us a little bit more freedom, where the single party compensation agreement was really designed specifically for a property without a listing agreement, where you're the only one being compensated. Okay, you're not passing it on to somebody else, regardless of how you represent the parties in that transaction. Okay, there's nobody else involved. This one is, there could be other people involved. So I might have this agreement here with the seller. So notice here, it just has the principal signature and the broker's signature, right? It's just me and them. We're agreeing to it. So I might have this in place, and then the buyer's agent may submit the cooperating broker compensation agreement, that CBC form that we covered first, to confirm what I verbally told them would be the commission on this property. So we might use those two in conjunction as part of the same transaction, but this would probably be the agreement between the seller and the listing brokerage. Okay. Questions about these forms? I know they're a little bit confusing. All right. So again, the cooperating broker or the commission agreement, this one here, the CA form, and the single party compensation form, which is this one up here. The SP form. So the CA and the SP, those are generally utilized when it's an off-market property. You don't have to fill out the full listing agreement. We can just do a single party compensation agreement, or the bottom one, the compensation agreement. We can do one of those two forms and bypass having to fill out a complete listing agreement for something that we know is going to be a closed sale and not actually going to go on the market or in the MLS or be listed if this party doesn't buy it. Okay, single party compensation agreement or commission agreement. The cooperating broker compensation agreement, we're going to see that one come into play a lot more often, would be my guess. That again is utilized to confirm the commission that's listed in the MLS. If we're no longer listing commissions in the MLS, we would utilize this form to confirm what the listing agent told us the commission would be. Or we're going to utilize this form for any properties that aren't in our primary MLS or reciprocal MLSs to confirm and make sure that we are going to be paid compensation for bringing a buyer for that property. So that's how your cooperating broker compensation agreement form is going to be used. And with everything going on with NAR, again, chances are we're going to see this a little bit more frequently as we confirm things if they pull the compensation out of the MLS, which it sounds like that's the direction they're going to, as long as everybody agrees and approves the settlement that has been presented. But we won't know till July, just so you know. That's a July decision. Any questions, thoughts, comments before we wrap up for today? All right, everyone, have a fabulous day. Thank you so much for joining me. All right, fabulous, everyone. I hope you have a great day. We will see you tomorrow at 11 o'clock for Setting Yourself Up for Success Realtor Basics, and then later this week for Staying Out of Court.
Thank you, Amy.
Absolutely.